Welcome back. It's me, Wendy, once again, and I'm going to be sharing with you now, continuing the story, with Chapter 4, which is The Flight. Now, of course, we all remember where Neverland is. Second to the right and straight on till morning. And that, Peter had told me, was the way to Neverland. But even birds carrying maps and consulting them at windy corners could not have cited it with these instructions. Peter, you see, said just anything that came into his head. At first we trusted him implicitly, and so great were the delights of flying, and we wasted time circling around church spires and any other tall objects on the way that took our fancy. John and Michael raced, Michael getting a head start. We recalled with contempt that not so long ago we had thought ourselves fine fellows for being able to fly around a room. Not so long ago, but how long ago? We were flying over the sea before this thought began to disturb me. John thought it was our second sea and our third night. Sometimes it was dark and sometimes light. And now we were very cold, and then again very warm. Did we really feel hungry at times? Or were we merely pretending? Because Peter had such a jolly new way of feeding us. His way was to pursue the birds who had food in their mouths suitable for humans and snatch it from them. And then the birds would follow and snatch it back. And they would all go chasing each other gaily for months. Part of, at last, with mutual expressions of goodwill. But I noticed with gentle concern that Peter did not seem to know that this was a rather odd way of getting your bread and butter, even if there were no other ways. Well, certainly we did not pretend to be very sleepy. We were sleepy. And that was a danger. For the moment you popped off, down you fell. The awful thing was that Peter thought this was funny. "There he goes again," he would cry gleefully as Michael suddenly dropped like a stone. "Save him! Save him!" I cried, looking with horror at the cruel sea far below. And eventually Peter would dive through the air to catch Michael, just before he would strike the sea. And it was lovely the way he did it. But he always waited till the last moment, and you felt it was his cleverness that interested him, and not the saving of a human life. Also, he found a variety, and the sport that engrossed him one moment would suddenly cease to engage him. There was always the possibility that the next time you fell, he would let you go. Well, he could sleep in air without falling, by merely laying on his back and floating. But this was partly at least because he was so light, and if you got behind him and blew, he went faster. "Do be more polite to him," I whispered to John when we were playing Follow the Leader. "Well, then tell him to stop showing off," said John. When playing Follow the Leader, Peter would fly close to the water and touch every shark's tail in passing, just as in the street you may run your finger along the iron railing. We could not follow him in this with much success, so perhaps it was rather like showing off, especially as he kept looking behind to see how many tails we'd missed. "You must be nice to him," I impressed on my brothers. What could we do if he were to leave us? "We could go back," Michael said. "And how could we ever find our way back without him?" "Well, then, we could go on," said John. "Well, that is the awful thing, John. We should have to go on, but we don't know how to stop." This was true. Peter had forgotten to show us how to stop. John said that if worse came to worse, all we had to do was go straight on, for the world was round. So in time, we must come back to our own window. And who is to get food for us, John? Well, I nipped a bit out of that eagle's mouth pretty neatly, Wendy. After the 20th try, I reminded him. And even though we became good at picking up food, see how we bump against clouds and things if he were not near to lend us a hand? And indeed, we were constantly bumping. We could now fly stronger, though we still kicked far too much. But if we saw a cloud in front of us, the more we tried to avoid it, the more certainly we bumped into it. If Nana had been with us, she would have had a bandage around Michael's forehead by this time. Peter was not with us for a moment, and we felt rather lonely up there by ourselves. He could go so much faster than us, and he would suddenly shoot out of sight and have some adventure in which we had no share. When he would come down laughing over something fearfully funny that he had been saying to a star, but he had already forgotten what it was he said. Or he would come up with mermaid scales still sticking to him, and yet not be able to say for certain what was happening. It was really rather irritating to us who had never seen a mermaid. And if he forgets them so quickly, I argued, how can we expect that he will go on remembering us? And indeed, sometimes when he returned, he did not remember us. At least, not well. I was sure of it. I saw recognition come to his eyes as he was about to pass us the time of day and go on. Even once I had to call him by name. Peter, I'm Wendy, I said agitatedly, and he was very sorry. Say, Wendy, he whispered to me, always, if you see me forgetting you, just keep on saying, I'm Wendy, and then I'll remember. Well, of course, this was rather unsatisfactory. However, to make amends, he showed us how to lie out flat on a strong wind, and that was going our way, and it was such a pleasant change that we tried it several times and found that we could sleep thus this way with safety. Indeed, we would have slept longer, but Peter quickly tired of sleeping, and soon he would cry in his captain voice, "We get off here!" So with occasional tiffs, and on the whole rollicking, we drew near the Neverland. And after many moons, we did reach it. And what is more, we had been going pretty straight all the time. Not perhaps so much owing to the guidance of Peter or Tink, as because the island was looking for us. It was only thus that anyone may sight those magical shores. There it is, said Peter calmly. Where? Where? Where all the arrows are pointing. And indeed, 1,000,000 golden arrows were pointing it out to us, all directed by their friend the sun, who wanted them to be sure of their way before leaving them for the night. John, Michael, and I stood on tiptoe in the air to get our first sight of the island. Strange to say, we all recognized it at once, and until fear fell upon us, we hailed it, not as something long dreamt of and seen at last, but as of a familiar friend of whom we had been returning home for the holidays. John, look, there's the lagoon. And Wendy, look at the turtle burying their eggs in the sand. I say, John, I see your flamingo with the broken leg. Look, Michael, there's your cave. John, what is that in the brushwood? It's a wolf with her whelps. Wendy, I do believe that is your little whelp. There's my boat, John, with her side stove in. No, it isn't. We burned your boat. Well, that's her at any rate. I say, John, I can see the smoke of the natives' camp. Where? Show me, and I'll tell you by the way the smoke curls whether they are on the warpath. Well, there, just across the mysterious river. Oh, I see it now. Yep, they are on the warpath right enough. Peter was a little annoyed with us for knowing so much, but if he wanted to lord it over us, his triumph was at the hand. For, have I not told you that fear fell upon us? It came as the arrows went, leaving the island in gloom. In the old days at home, the Neverland had always begun to look a little dark and threatening by bedtime. Then unexplored patches arose in it and spread. Black shadows moved about in them. The roar of the beast of prey were quite different now. And above all, you lost the certainty that you would win. You were quite glad that the night lights were on. You even liked Nana to say that this was just the mantelpiece over there and that the Neverland was all make-believe. But of course, Neverland had been make-believe in those days. But now it was real, and there were no nightlights, and it was getting darker every moment. And where was Nana? We had been flying apart, but now we huddled close to Peter. His careless manner was gone at last, and his eyes were sparkling, and a tingle went through us every time we touched his body. We were now over the fearsome island, flying so low that sometimes a tree grazed our feet. Well, nothing horrid was visible in the air, yet our progress had become slow and labored, exactly as if we were pushing our way through hostile forces. Sometimes we hung in the air until Peter had beaten on with his fists. "They don't want us to land," he exclaimed. "Well, who are they?" I whispered, shuddering. But he could not or would not say. Tinker Bell had been asleep on his shoulder, but now he woke her up and sent her out in front. Sometimes he poised himself in the air, listening intently, with a hand to his ear. And again he would stare down with eyes so bright that they seemed to bore 2 holes to the earth. Having done these things, he went on again. His courage was almost appalling. "Would you like an adventure now?" he said casually to John. "Or would you like to have your tea first?" I said tea first, quickly, and Michael pressed my hand in gratitude. But the braver John hesitated. "What kind of adventure?" he asked cautiously. "There's a pirate asleep in the premise just beneath us," Peter told him. "If you'd like, we'll go down and kill him." "I don't see him," John said after a long pause. "Well, I do." "Suppose," John said a little huskily, "we were to wake him up?" Peter spoke indignantly. "You don't think I would kill him while he was sleeping? I would wake him up first and then kill him. That's the way I always do." "I say, do you kill many?" "Tons." John said how ripping, but thankfully decided to have tea first. He asked if there were many pirates on the island just now, and Peter said he had never known so many. "Well, who is the captain now?" "Hook," answered Peter, and his face became very stern as he said that hated word. "Just Hook?" "Aye." And indeed Michael began to cry. Even John could speak in only gulps, for we knew Hook's reputation. "He was Blackbeard's boatswain," John whispered huskily, "and he is the worst of them all. He is the only man of whom Barbecued was afraid." "That's him," said Peter. "What is he like? Is he big?" "He's not so big as he was." "What do you mean?" "I cut off a bit of him." "You?" "Yes, me. said Peter sharply. I wasn't meaning to be disrespectful. Oh, well, all right. But I say, what bit? His right hand. Well, then he can't fight now. Oh, can't he just? He's left-handed. He has an iron hook instead of a right hand, and he claws with it. Claws! I say, John, said Peter. Yes. Say, aye, aye, sir. Aye, aye, sir. There is one thing, Peter continued, that every boy who serves under me has to promise, and so must you. John paled. It is this. If we meet Hook in an open fight, you must leave him to me. I promise, John said loyally. For the moment, we were feeling little less eerie because Tink was flying with us, and in her light, we could distinguish each other. Unfortunately, she could not fly so slowly as us, and so she had to go round and round in a circle, in which we moved in as in a halo. I quite liked it until Peter pointed the drawbacks. She tells me that the pirates had sighted us before the darkness came and got the long tom out. The big gun? Yes. And of course, they must see her light. And if they were to guess that we are near it, they're sure to let it fly. Wendy, John, Michael, well, tell her to go away at once, Peter, we cried, but he refused. She thinks we have lost the way, and she's rather frightened. You don't think I would send her away all by herself when she's frightened? For a moment the circle of light was broken, and something gave Peter a loving little pinch. Well, then tell her, I begged, to put out her light. I can't. She can't put it out. That's about the only thing fairies can't do. It just goes out by itself when they fall asleep. Same with the stars. Well, then tell her to sleep, John almost ordered. She can't sleep except when she's sleepy. It's the only other thing fairies can't do. Well, it seems to me, John said, that there are only two things worth doing. And here, John got a pinch, but not a loving one. If only one of us had a pocket, Peter said, and we could carry her in it. However, we had set off in such a hurry that there was not a pocket between the four of us. But then he had a happy idea. John's hat! Tink agreed to travel by hat if it was carried in the hand. John carried it, though she had hoped it was Peter who would carry it. But presently I took the hat because John said it struck against his knee as he flew, and this, we shall see, will lead to mischief, for Tinker Bell hated to be under the obligation to me. But in the black topper, her light was completely hidden, and we flew in silence. It was a stillness silence we had ever known, broken once by a distant lapping, which Peter explained was the wild beasts drinking at the ford, and again by a rasping sound that might have been the branches of trees rubbing together, but he said it was the natives sharpening their knives. Even these noises ceased. To Michael, the loneliness was dreadful. If only something would make a sound, he cried. As if to answer his request, the air was rent with the most tremendous crash he had ever heard. The pirates had fired the long tom at us. The roar of it echoed through the mountains. The echoes seemed to cry savagely, "Where are they? Where are they? Where are they?" Thus sharply did we learn the difference between an island of make-believe and the same island that had come true. When at last the heavens were steady again, John and Michael found themselves alone in the darkness. John was treading the air mechanically, and Michael, without knowing how to float, was floating. "Are you shot?" John said tremendously. "I haven't tried myself out yet," Michael whispered back. We know now that no one had been hit. Peter, however, had been carried by the wind of the shot far out into the sea, and while I was blown upwards with no other companion but Tinker Bell. And it would have been well for me if at that moment I had just dropped the hat. I don't know whether the idea came suddenly to Tink or whether she had planned it on the way, but she at once popped out of the hat and began to lure me to my destruction. Well, Tink was not all bad, or rather, she was all bad just now. But on the other hand, sometimes she was all good. Fairies have to be one thing or the other, because being so small, they unfortunately have room for only one feeling at a time. They are, however, allowed to change, only it must be a complete change. At present, she was full of jealousy of me. What she said in her lovely tinkle, I could not know, of course. But I believe some of it was bad words. But it sounded kind, and she flew back and forth, plainly meaning, "Follow me, and all will be well." Well, what else could poor little me do? I called out to Peter and John and Michael, and only got mocking echoes in reply. I did not know yet that Tink hated me with the fierce hatred of a very woman, and so, bewildered and now staggering in my flight, I followed Tink to my doom. What will happen next? Well, unfortunately, you'll have to find out in the next chapter, but we'll be back to share the story soon. Until then, please be safe and take care. Bye!